Alright guys, we are going to go over our 4.1 guided reading notes. This is just an answer check so you can make sure you have everything filled out correctly or fill in any of the notes that you are missing. So we are going to jump right in and get started. So for the introduction, Gregor Mendel experimented with hundreds of pea plants to understand the process of heredity. Heredity is then it's the passing of those physical characteristics. So it's just those physical characteristics. Genetics is considered the scientific study of heredity. And actually, heredity is the passing of traits from parents to offspring. So I apologize, heredity should be C. And then traits are those physical characteristics that we have. Then moving on, in a flower, the female sex cells or eggs are produced by the pistil, and then pollen, which contains the male sex cells, are produced in the stamen. Purebred organisms are considered to be the offspring of many generations that have the same trait or those physical characteristics. Then for the flow chart, we were looking at Mendel's first experiment with pea plants and what happened. So those purebred tall plants were crossed with purebred short plants. Then that first generation of offspring, or that F1 generation, showed that they were all tall. So we're going to say the F1 offspring are all tall plants. Then Mendel allowed those F1 offspring to self-pollinate. And then that second generation, or those F2 offspring, had a mix of tall plants and short plants. So it had a mix there. Okay. Looking at the diagram on page 113, the other traits that Mendel studied, he looked at seed shape, seed color, the coating color, what the pod shape looked like or pod color, and even the flower position and stem height. So the answer that is going to be true is D. So there was the pod color, the seed shape, and the flower position. Okay. So we're going to highlight that as our correct answer. Then the two forms of the trait for seed shape in pea plants were round and wrinkled. Moving on to dominant and recessive alleles. You are highlighting each sentence that is true about the alleles. So alleles are considered different forms of a gene. The trait that is controlled by a dominant allele always shows up in the organism when the allele is present. That dominant allele is kind of the one in control. And then the two about the recessive alleles are false. Recessive alleles can be present, when dominant gene or dominant alleles are present, but they get hidden. So recessive alleles don't hide dominant alleles. Dominant alleles hide recessive alleles. So, is the following sentence true or false? Only pea plants that have 2 recessive alleles for short stems will be short. This would be true because you have both alleles for short stems is recessive, and if both of those alleles are recessive, then you're going to have a short stem. If it has one allele that's recessive and one allele that's dominant, that dominant allele is going to hide the recessive allele, and so you're going to have a tall stem. Then going through matching the pea plants with how they were mixed and their alleles. If you look at page 114, that kind of helps it out as well. But a purebred means that it has the same alleles. And then a hybrid means that it has one allele for each trait. So there's 2 different alleles for the trait. So a purebred short is going to have 2 alleles for short stems. So it's going to be that recessive allele. A purebred then would be those 2 alleles for the tall stems. That tall is considered the dominant trait, so that's a purebred. And then that hybrid tall means that there's one allele for tall stems and one allele for short stems. Because you have those different alleles for the trait, it's still going to be tall because that tall stem allele is dominant. Then when we go to question 15 and 16, a dominant allele is represented by a capital letter. And then a recessive allele is represented by a lowercase letter. And generally, we designate the same letter for each trait that we're talking about. So like for stems, for the tall stem, the book used T, a capital T, and then for short stems, it used a lowercase t. So you don't want to change the letter, you just change whether it's capital or lowercase. So question 17 then is how might a geneticist write the alleles to show that a tall pea plant has one allele for tall stems and one allele for short stems? So remember that tall stem allele is dominant, so it would be a capital T. And then a short stem allele is recessive, so it would be a lowercase t. I'm just going to add that as a note, saying, the capital T represents the dominant tall stem allele, and then the lowercase t represents the recessive short stem allele. Then our last question, question 18, is the following sentence true or false? Some scientists during Mendel's time thought Mendel should be called the father of genetics. If you read through the last section on page 115, it says at the end that unfortunately the importance of Mendel's discovery was not recognized during his lifetime. So he was not called the father of genetics until after he had passed away. And these scientists kind of rediscovered his work and gave him credit for that after the fact. So this statement would be false. But he is known as the father of genetics. Unfortunately, he didn't get recognized while he was alive. That is it for our guided reading notes then. So if you have gone through and double checked your answers, please make sure these notes did get submitted. Otherwise, have a good day.